In this video, we're going to be discussing Rabbi Zusha of Anipoli, the great Chassidic master and Chassidic Rebbe in the 18th century. He was born in the year 1718, approximately, and passed away in the year 1800 on the second day of Shvat. He's famous for being the brother, not famous for, but he's also famous as being the brother of Rabbi Elimelech of Lizensk, another great Hasidic master. These two brothers, the story goes that their parents were extremely poor. There's lots of different versions of the story, but essentially the story was that his father was very poor, owned an inn or something like that, and he also was a water carrier. And apparently, he had listened to a sermon by the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Chassidic movement, and the Baal Shem Tov spoke about how we have to do mitzvahs, from the heart and with good intentions. And he thought, what is a mitzvah I could do that will have good intentions? And he had 4 wealthy homes that he would service as being the water carrier and supplying them with water, and obviously they paid very well. And there was another water carrier in the city, and the other water carrier served 4 of the synagogues in the city, and they didn't pay so well. So this, the father, I believe his name was Eliezer Lipa, he decided he was going to switch. So not only would he get to serve the synagogues, but he would also be helping another Jew make a living. And even though it affected obviously him financially, he was so happy he was able to do this and fulfill what the Baal Shem Tov had said. And as a reward, God gave him these 2 great children. Now, what is different about Rabbi Zusha versus his brother, even though there's a lot of stories with them together, Rabbi Zusha did not really have such a big of an impact as far as his students. Rabbi Elimelech of Lizensk became the great rabbi, the great Hasidic master of Galicia and Poland, and many students and many dynasties of Hasidic dynasties trace themselves back as students of Rabbi Elimelech, or as he's known, the great Ramelech. Rabbi Zusha, on the other hand, did not necessarily have as many students, but his impact, nonetheless, was extremely, really felt, and that's why I decided to do this video about Rabbi Zusha, because of his impact and his teachings and how they impact us. His mother also apparently was a great, very charitable woman as well. His name was, let's go to his name. His name was Meshulam Zusman. That was his full name, it appears, at least the way it is written by some of his colleagues. But he's also known as Rabbi Zusha. Again, kind of a nickname for Zusman. His name is Zusha, a lot of different versions of the name, but apparently his name was Meshulam Zusman. He was a student of the Maggid of Mizrich. We spoke about in the last video about the Maggid was the successor to the Baal Shem Tov and had 120 students, and Rabbi Zusha and his brother Rabbi Melech were also students of his. One of the things that is interesting about him was that whenever he was extremely emotional, fiery, passionate person, and when the Maggid would speak, the different students had different reactions, and many of them would faint. Some of them would go into ecstasy, and Reb Zusha would start to scream, "Oh yeah," and they would take him out of the beis medrash, out of the study hall, as not to disturb the teachings of the Maggid. So one of the Chassidic masters said that Rabbi Zusha never taught. There are no books written by Rabbi Zusha because he never learned. He felt he never learned. He only heard the teachings secondhand. Though that is not true. There are many teachings of Rabbi Zusha. There are books that have been compiled of his teachings. And maybe we'll discuss a few of them today. Another thing that him and his brother did was they went into self-imposed exile, and they would meet people. And one of the things they would do is they would role play. These were great rabbis, great Hasidic masters, and they had divine intuition about what people were struggling with. And Rabbi Zusha and Rabbi Melech would sit next to somebody, and they would say, I sinned the sin, and it wasn't him, it was the person who they were sitting next to had made that mistake. And they would say, I feel so terrible, and that person would start to feel terrible also because of what he would explain how what he was going through. And then the other brother would prescribe, how to correct that, and through that they were able to help people. They would also help a lot of widows and orphans and people who were in captivity. One time they were traveling, again in an incognito way, and they were traveling with a band of what turned out to be a band of thieves. They didn't realize that their travel companions were a band of thieves, and they were all arrested, the entire group. So they put them in a jail cell, and Reb Zusha decided he was going to daven mincha, and his brother says, "You can't daven here. There's a pail, in the middle of the room where people use the bathroom, and according to Jewish law, you're not allowed to daven. You're not allowed to pray in such a room in front of this dirty in such a dirty place. You can't say God's name." And Reb Zusha sat down and he started to cry. He felt terrible. He can't serve God. He can't pray, and essentially his brother said, "What do you mean? Uh, if God, the same God who told us to pray, told us in this situation you don't pray." And they said, "Wow, this is such an opportunity. We never got to serve God in this way before." And they started to dance around the pail, and the prison guard said, "What are they doing? These people are crazy. They're dancing around the pail. I'll show them." And he took the pail out, and now they're really happy and they're able to pray the mincha service. Another story about their exile was one time they were going through a town, again in incognito, in this period of their life when they were doing exile, and they went to a rich man's house and they asked a place to stay, and the rich man said, "There's a go to the shul. There's a place in the back where the beggars sleep. You could sleep there." And so they ended up going to the next house. The next house was a poor person house, and he welcomed them in and he hosted them. Later on, years later, when they come as well-known Chassidic masters, and this rich man comes out to greet them. He doesn't recognize them from their previous encounter many years earlier, and he says, "I was told by the community that I get to host you. I have such a wonderful house." So he came and he brings their horses into the stable and he takes their luggage, and then they go to the synagogue and they don't come back. So he finds out, where did they go? He said, "Oh, they're staying at this poor person's house, the same person who had hosted them previously." And he ran to the house. He said, "The community said you could stay with me. Why are you staying with this poor person? I have a wonderful house for you." And they said, "Well, last time we came, we were just ourselves. You didn't want to save us. You didn't want to host us. And now that we come with horses and luggage, and now you want to host us. So we gave you the horses and the luggage. That's the only thing that seems to matter to you." And this person obviously learned a great lesson. Another story is that about Rabbi Zusha and his Torah study. At one time, the students of the Maggid were studying something, and they couldn't understand a law in the Rambam. And Rabbi Zusha asked them, "No, what's going on?" They said, "You don't know how to learn." They thought that he was an ignoramus. He was just a spiritual, person, but he wasn't a scholar. So they said, they said, "Oh, there's nothing to do with you." So he started to cry, and he said, "Hashem, God, Zusha doesn't understand." And he started to cry until he passed out. And he woke up and he told the other students the explanation of this passage in the Rambam. They said, "How do you know?" He said, "Oh, every time I don't understand, I cry and I pray to God until the author of this passage had revealed himself to me, the Rambam himself in Gan Eden in paradise, and he explained it to me." So from then on, they used to call Reb Zusha the true Gaon, the true understander of Torah, because he learned Torah in this way, that the authors would come and explain it to him. He also ended up being when the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the Alter Rebbe, who we talked about in a previous video, when he printed the Tanya, his magnum opus, he asked for approbations. And he only got 2 approbations from his colleagues, and one of them was from Rabbi Zusha. And in fact, for this reason, that they had this tremendous bond, and also that he had this spiritual intuition. And in fact, Rabbi Shneur Zalman also raised money for him when he was going through a difficult time, and to help him. As we said, he was also in extreme poverty his whole life, to the point where some person was struggling. They didn't have a lot of money, so the Maggid of Mezrich, his teacher, sent some people to him and said, Rabbi Zusha struggles with poverty. Maybe he could help you. And they came, and he was living literally in a hut with nothing, no furniture, barely any food. And they said to him, "How do you deal with this?" He's like, "I don't know why the Maggid sent you to me. I have everything that I need." And that was his reaction. He's also famous. One famous teaching of his is the 7 lessons he learned from a thief. I'm not going to get into the teaching right now, but essentially, what he did was he learned from everybody. That was really what it was all about. In addition, he always learned positive things from everybody, and he would say that when a person does a sin, an evil angel is created, and but these evil angels, they're always missing a hand, missing a foot, missing an organ or something, because the person never really does a sin with all his heart, and therefore that's always lacking. One of the most famous teachings of his is a famous teaching that he said when he comes up on high after 120 years, they're not going to ask him, "Why weren't you Abraham? Why weren't you Isaac? Why weren't you Jacob? Why weren't you Moses?" They're going to ask you, "Why weren't you Zusha? Why didn't you fulfill your purpose and with the abilities and the capabilities that you were given? Why didn't you use them out to the fullest?" It's a very famous teaching of his, and what probably the most famous thing that everybody knows about Rabbi Zusha is the why weren't you Zusha phrase. He passed away, like we said, on the second day of Shvat in the year 1800, and he was buried in Anipoli next to the Maggid of Mezrich. He was buried together in the same area, and unfortunately, the Nazis destroyed the cemetery. And today, a marker was rebuilt to mark the burial spot of the Maggid, as well as Rabbi Zusha, in the city of Anipoli, which is the city he became famous for, again known as Rabbi Zusha of Anipoli. That is all we have for today. Thank you very much. If you have any, for listening, if you have any questions, comments, something I should have said, if I made a mistake, put in the comments. We love to hear feedback, and we'll see you in the next video.